in Montreal and Toronto, from London to Paris, and in cities around the world this weekend, huge crowds demanded a ceasefire in Gaza, a request that seems simple on the surface, but one rejected by Israel and its Western allies.
We demand a ceasefire. How many children are supposed to die for us to do something about this?
How many deaths do you need to start making a change?
Arab nations like Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, and Morocco all agree a ceasefire is best, while Canada, the U.S., Britain, and the European Union are instead proposing what they call a humanitarian pause.
To get aid in, to get Canadians out, to get vulnerable people out.
Thanks very much for having us.
It's a pleasure.
So, what's the difference? We asked a Canadian former ambassador to Israel, John Allen.
In your view, what is the difference between a ceasefire and a humanitarian pause?
A humanitarian pause is exactly what it says it is. It's a pause to allow humanitarian goods, medicine, food, water, perhaps fuel into the country. When people are calling for a ceasefire, they are basically saying that the war should stop right now.
While the United Nations loosely defines a ceasefire as an agreement to stop hostilities, it says a humanitarian pause is considered temporary and purely for humanitarian purposes.
Certainly a humanitarian pause is feasible, and I would say it should happen. It should happen as quickly as possible. They should increase the number of trucks coming in.
Israel won't consider either option without the release of hostages. Its military targeting Hamas in Gaza from the ground and from the air. So it's up to other countries to step in and stop the violence, says Egypt's foreign minister.
But it is the international community's responsibility always to seek the cessation of hostilities.
But speaking beside him, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said, now is not the time.
A ceasefire now would simply leave Hamas in place, able to regroup and repeat what it did on October 7th.
Indeed, Hamas's unprecedented attacks on Israel changed the course of history. In the past, Israel and Hamas have agreed to ceasefires, like 2.5 years ago, letting aid trucks move into Gaza after 11 days of fighting. But this war will last for months, predicts former U.S. State Department negotiator Aaron David Miller.
We're not talking here about a humanitarian pause for in localized areas for 6, 8, 10, 12 hours. If you're talking ceasefire, what the Arab states clearly want is an indirect negotiated ceasefire, which would presumably put the conflict on hold or perhaps even end it.
Around the world, the protests will rage on, with no one stopping the violence for now. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
So let's find out more about the likelihood going forward that Israel would agree to some sort of halt. Aaron David Miller is in Washington. He's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and served 6 secretaries of state with both parties as an advisor on Arab-Israeli negotiations, and we saw him briefly in Thomas's story. Aaron, let's go through this, step by step. First of all, people are talking about the possibility of a ceasefire. How likely do you think that is?
I think it's highly unlikely. It's conceivable if the Israelis received assurances that all of the hostages would be released, not just the foreign nationals, which I suspect is part of Hamas's game plan to keep the Israelis. They might agree to a temporary suspension of hostilities in an effort to secure and facilitate all of those folks coming out of Gaza, but under no circumstances will the Israelis agree to a negotiated ceasefire that is designed to somehow stabilize the conflict or perhaps even end it.
And so what about that humanitarian pause? You said you could see one short one, maybe to get people out of Gaza, but especially international citizens, but beyond that?
I mean, the Israelis did it once on October 20 when Hamas agreed to release the 2 women, the dual nationals. The Israelis agreed to stop military activity for a number of hours. That's, I guess, a humanitarian pause. The other functional result would be an effort to surge badly needed humanitarian assistance, both through southern Gaza, through the Rafah crossing at a much higher rate and level, and also to get needed humanitarian assistance to the roughly 500,000 Palestinians who are still in Gaza City, where the Israelis are operating. That would be, again, localized and short-term to facilitate humanitarian aid going in and to get humans out.
We have just about maybe 45 seconds. In this part of the world, even Canada, when the United States gets involved, it gets a lot of attention. But in that part of the world, how much weight do you think the United States has in trying to, whatever resolution looks like, in trying to achieve a resolution?
Not much, frankly. Not if we're talking about the United States somehow getting Hamas and Israel off of their primary objectives. I don't think the U.S. carries much weight at all. Humanitarian pauses, surging humanitarian assistance, release of hostages, yes, but certainly not dissuading the Israelis from their primary objective, which is to eradicate Hamas's military organization in Gaza and also end its sovereignty.
Aaron David Miller, thank you very much for your insights.
Pleasure, Ian. Thanks for having me.